Hi guys, welcome back to the Homespun Annie channel. So in this video, I am going to share with you my recipe and method for making hearty whole wheat sourdough bread. And to start, you're going to want to have some freshly fed and bubbly active starter. This is really important that your starter is nice and bubbly. And I will make a video at some point of feeding my starter and how I do that. But that's what you want to start with. Now, I don't necessarily measure exactly my sourdough starter. As long as it's a good amount and it's nice and active and bubbly, I don't worry too much about how much there is. Now, with that being said, I would want to make sure that there's at least about 125 grams. But other than that, if it's more, that's totally fine. If it's a little bit less, that's okay too. So you don't have to be perfectly exact. Now this was a lot of starter, so this was probably about a cup and a half. I did not push the correct button on the scale, so I can't tell you how much exactly it weighed, this amount here. But anyway, it was about a cup and a half, I would say. And to that, I add 735 grams of lukewarm water. Now, I don't take the temperature of the water, I just go based on how the water feels. And I remember a long time ago, someone told me, this was back probably when I was in middle school, someone told me that all you need to do when you're baking bread for the temperature of the water is feel it on your wrist. And if it's the temperature that you would bathe a brand new newborn baby in, then that is the perfect temp. And that's always what I've gone by. And it works wonderfully. So you don't have to actually use a thermometer if you don't want to. Just feel it out and see if it would be the right temp for bathing a newborn baby. Anyway, then I go and I whisk the sourdough starter and the water together till the starter is perfectly dissolved in the water. And then I'm going to add 200 grams of all-purpose flour, and this can be all-purpose flour or bread flour. I've never actually used bread flour before, so I've always just used all-purpose. And then you're going to add 800 grams of whole wheat flour, and I used a non-GMO organic whole wheat flour. And you just measure these out. This is where you are going to need your scale, your kitchen scale, to weigh these things out. And then once you get those in there, you're going to put in 25 grams of kosher salt. So I use kosher salt, which is of course coarser than regular table salt. So it's not as salty, I guess you could say, as 25 grams of table salt. So if you're going to use table salt, make sure that you kind of adjust accordingly for the saltiness. And then I start out mixing with just a wooden spoon just to kind of start to bring it together. And then you will see that I move to using my hands. And with baking bread, I think it's wonderful just to get your hands in there. Now you can use a stand mixer. I have not made this in a stand mixer before, but I know some people do bake their sourdough bread and their regular bread and they use a stand mixer to mix everything together. I've always just used my hands and I love doing it that way. So anyway, here I moved to using my hands and I just get that all incorporated into a really nice, and this will be a sticky dough. So this will be sticky at first. And that's okay. Don't add more flour, just go with it, and I promise it'll be fine. So I get that all mixed together, and then I'm going to take just a regular like kitchen towel, tea towel, and get that damp. And you don't want it soaking wet, but I just get some water in it, wring it out, and then I cover the dough with the tea towel, and this is going to sit and rest for an hour. You probably don't want to go over an hour. You could do 30 minutes if you wanted. That's totally fine if you're kind of pressed for time, but an hour is the best. one of the things you have to remember when making sourdough bread is it takes a lot of time, and it's something that you have to plan for. You're going to have to kind of plan a couple days for getting this bread made. And so here it had been sitting for an hour, and now I'm going to start the stretch and fold process. And so here you just take and pull up a portion of the dough, stretch it out, and fold it over on itself. And I do about 4 or 5 turns, just depending. And it's going to be pretty sticky at first, but it will start to kind of tighten up as you do this more. And then you're just going to cover it back up with the towel, the damp tea towel, and let this sit for 15 minutes. And then after 15 minutes, you're going to do the stretch and fold again. And one thing I noticed with using the whole wheat is that it does get tighter a lot quicker than if you're just using all-purpose flour. The all-purpose flour, it'll be a lot looser for longer. And so what I researched was saying that with the whole wheat flour, it absorbs more water. And so that's why you tend to have a tighter dough earlier on. So here I am doing it again, and you can see that it's definitely tightened up. And so you're going to want to do this stretch and fold process 4 times. So it'll take about an hour. So every 15 minutes, you're going to do the stretch and fold and let it sit for 15 minutes. And then once the stretching and folding is done, you are going to cover this again. I usually freshen the damp towel, so I'll run under the water again, get it nice and fresh, freshly damp. And then you're going to cover the dough again, and this time you are going to let it rest and rise for 4 to 8 hours. Now, I found that I only needed to let it rise for 4 hours. When I'm doing the all-purpose flour, sometimes it goes the full 8 hours before it has doubled in size. But another thing I read when I researched was that with the whole wheat flour, it tends to ferment quicker than all-purpose flour. And so that's why I found that the rise time was half the amount as when I used all-purpose flour. So this rose for 4 hours, and now I'm going to put it out onto a lightly floured, I use a wooden cutting board, but whatever work surface works for you. And I get that out, and then I get my pastry cutter, and I'm going to separate this into 4 equal parts. Now, you could do 2 larger loaves if you wanted, and I've done that before, and just cut it in half and do 2 large loaves, but I wanted to do 4 small loaves this time. So just separating that out, and then you're going to form these into little balls. And you want to be kind of gentle with it. You don't want to press out. You're not going to knead this and press out all of the air that has formed. So you're just going to kind of gently shape this into a ball. And I know there's different techniques for doing this, but this is just how I do it. And then in a bowl, I use my old Pyrex bowls with a tea towel, lined with a tea towel. I know people do have the nice sourdough proving baskets, which are nice. I hope to have those someday, but I've always just used my Pyrex dishes with just a tea towel in them. And then you're going to put the dough into the lined bowl. And here you can see I'm just going to repeat this process with all of the dough. And as you can see here, I'm just simply kind of, I guess I would describe it as wrapping the dough around itself. But I really want to make sure that I'm not like pressing out all of the air that's developed. And so I just keep it really gentle and just kind of wrap it around itself a little bit to make it smooth. And then I stick it in the bowl. And then I just kind of pinch. This will be the bottom of the loaf, so you're just going to kind of pinch that together and move on to the next one. But yes, you just really want to make sure that you're not going to remove the air that has developed. And like I said, there are different techniques for doing this. This is just the one that I kind of developed on my own as I was learning, and it's always just worked. Now, after these are in the bowl, I cover them with some plastic wrap. And I've seen people, they'll use shower caps, which is kind of a brilliant way. There's also, special little covers that people have made or buy. But I just use what I have, and this has always worked for me. Now, of course, I don't really want to use a ton of plastic wrap. It's kind of wasteful, but anyway, until I get those fun little sourdough covers, this is what I've done. And then I just put one piece over the top, and then I take a longer piece and just kind of make it into a, I don't know what you'd call it, just a tie to go around the edge of the bowl to hold it all together. And like I said, this is kind of, I don't know, it uses a lot of plastic wrap, so you don't have to do that if you don't want to. You can go and purchase a shower cap or some of those fun little sourdough covers that people make. But anyway, this is the next morning. So those went into the fridge. I covered all of them. They went into the fridge overnight. So for about, you want them to be proving in the fridge for about 8 to 12 hours, no longer than 12 hours. And so the next morning, I pulled them out of the fridge and put them onto some parchment paper. And the parchment paper is very important. Don't skip the parchment paper. But I will then dust them with some all-purpose flour. I use the all-purpose flour instead of whole wheat just because it creates more contrast for the scoring. You can see the scoring a lot better than if I were to use the whole wheat flour. And the scoring has a dual purpose. So yes, it looks pretty and it makes the loaves, really beautiful, but it also allows the steam to escape during the baking process. And if you don't do any scoring, then the loaf will kind of, not necessarily explode, but kind of in all kinds of weird places, and it just won't look as nice, and you won't have as nice of a loaf. So you definitely want to score. You don't have to get fancy with it. You can just do a basic score, but it is really fun. You can go on Pinterest and find all kinds of fun scoring ideas for your sourdough. So yeah, anyway, like I said, doesn't have to be fancy, but it's definitely important. And so I had the oven preheating at 475 degrees, and my Dutch oven was preheating in the oven as well. And so you'll want a Dutch oven with a lid. I love using my cast iron. This is a 6-quart size. And I just think cast iron is wonderful for baking sourdough bread. And you're just going to put the loaf into the piping hot cast iron Dutch oven, put the lid back on, and then you're going to put this in the oven and bake for about 20 minutes. And just depending on the loaf size, you might have to adjust the time a little bit, but I found that 20 minutes for this size of a loaf works great. And then after 20 minutes, you're going to remove the lid and lower the oven temp to 450 degrees and bake for about another 15 minutes. And then that should be enough time. Now, if you're going to do 2 larger loaves instead of 4 small loaves, you will have to adjust the time. But yeah, it's one of those things you just kind of have to keep an eye on depending on your oven. And so here you're going to see I'm going to go ahead and bake the next 3 loaves. So one thing that you want to keep in mind is that because this recipe is using mostly whole wheat flour, you're not going to get as high of a rise on these loaves of bread as you would if you were using all-purpose flour or bread flour. Even if you were doing more of a 50-50 split, you might get more of a rise. I haven't tried that yet. I probably will at some point. But anyway, I just wanted you to note that you're not going to get a really high rise on these, just because the whole wheat makes for a denser loaf of sourdough bread. That being said, though, it is still absolutely delicious. So I'm going to cut open a cooled loaf here in a second to show you what it looks like on the inside. But this is just a wonderful, hearty, filling, whole wheat sourdough bread that goes perfectly with a bowl of hot fall soup. And I definitely recommend you give this recipe a try. I will have a link in the description box below to my blog where you'll be able to find the full recipe plus the printable version of the recipe if you want to print it out. So I really hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Give this video a like and share with someone else you think would enjoy it. And I will talk to you guys in the next video.